Hello, I'm the Underthinker. Welcome to my channel. This is part 2 of my series on Goodwill, entitled Managing Goodwill. If you haven't seen the other part, you might want to go check out part 1. Otherwise, jump right in, and if you see something or I use a term you don't understand, maybe I did define it in part 1. But anyway, let's get going. So in part 1 of the series on Goodwill, I talked about what Goodwill is in the context of social interaction, and I defined some of the ways that we accumulate Goodwill, right? In terms of whether we do it through who we are as a person, through what we do, or through the relationships that we have with other people. In part 2, we're going to be talking about how to manage Goodwill. And the way that I came to even thinking of it in terms of this had more to do with how to have better results in social interactions that I had personally. And then I realized that this way of organizing information can apply to more than just how to get along better with your friends. So in a business sense, Goodwill is an abstract or an intangible asset, right? You can't put your hands on it. You can't touch a Goodwill. It shows up only pretty much in transactions, right? You amortize it sometimes to get rid of it, but it shows up in transactions. And when we're talking about social interactions, Goodwill is, in a sense, almost like a social currency, right? It is the way that we have transactions between each other. So you can manage Goodwill, you can save up Goodwill, you can expend Goodwill, and you can treat it essentially like a currency, but it's very difficult to know how much that you have and what you're trying to exchange that currency for costs until you actually try and do that transaction. You can guess, but there's no way to know that you have 1,000 units of Goodwill and what I want costs 500 units of Goodwill, so therefore I have enough. So the way that we earn Goodwill, well, there's lots of ways of doing it. We can earn it by being helpful to other people, right? Or we can appropriate it if somebody else has Goodwill, and we'll talk about both of those in some little amount of detail. The way that we earn Goodwill would be by being helpful to others, right? That's clearly the most obvious way to get Goodwill. If I help you out in the future, you will help me out, right? There are other ways of getting Goodwill. For example, if I act in a kind and respectful manner to other people, people will think well of me. If I'm a person who seems like other people like, if I'm a thought leader or something like that, then I might be earning Goodwill through my actions. If I'm somebody who seems like they do a good job of making decisions, then I might earn Goodwill, and people might think of me as a leader, and I might try to get a status of some kind. Sometimes we earn Goodwill because other people think highly of us. If somebody who you respects somebody else, then you'll tend to respect them as well. The other ways that we can do it is to appropriate Goodwill. For example, in my prior video, when I was talking about collaborative or associative or collective Goodwill, that's not Goodwill that you've earned. That's Goodwill that you're essentially appropriating. If I decide I'm going to identify myself as a Republican, or I identify myself as a Democrat, other people will view me with all the good and the bad that comes from having that label. If I say I'm a feminist or an anti-feminist, if I say, I'm a social justice warrior or a gamergator, whatever the particular label that I attach, I will get usually Goodwill from people who think highly of the people in that group, and I will not get Goodwill, or I will lose Goodwill relative to the people who despise the people in those groups. So you can do it by identifying with a group. You can also do it by, say, pledging to help a cared about group. For example, if I say I'm going to Africa to build clean water facilities in small villages in Nairobi, then people might be inclined to help me to do that because they care about people who need clean water in Nairobi, if there are people who need clean water in Nairobi, and whatever. If another way of doing that is to advocate for that group, right? If I say I'm an advocate for impoverished black people who are not getting a fair shake, or for women who are not getting a fair shake, or for children or victims of domestic violence. I may not have to be a member of that group myself, but if I advocate for that, then I appropriate some of the goodwill that other people have for that group to myself, and thus increasing the amount of goodwill that I have to spend. So now that we've talked about what goodwill is and how we get it, how do we spend it? Well, the way that we spend goodwill is by getting other people to do things, either for us or for some other group. For example, if I'm going to Africa to have clean water in Nairobi, I randomly chose Nairobi, then I might get people to help give me money to fund my project. I might get someone to give me a ride to the airport. There are all kinds of ways that I could go to utilize that goodwill I've accumulated. If I help somebody by changing a tire when they were stuck or stranded on the side of the road, I may be able to get that person to give me a ride later. However, the way that we spend goodwill does not have to be related to the way that we earned it. That person might be willing to help me to fund my trip to Nairobi to give clean water because I've helped them with something else in the past. I helped them move. I helped them do something else, right? But the trick of it's going to be that it doesn't have to be related, but whatever you ask of somebody, they will have in their mind a cost in terms of goodwill. For example, it might be something that I don't care about doing very much, like say, I don't know, give $5 to support your cause. I might not have to have a lot of goodwill in order to do that for somebody. However, if what you're asking me to do is to put my hand into a jar full of crickets, there may not be enough goodwill in the world to get me to do that. However, if you ask another person who loves to put their hands in a jar full of crickets, they might be like, hey, I might hate you, but bring on the crickets. So the cost is not determined by the person who is requesting. Just like when you go to a store, the cost is determined by the person who's selling, or the person that you want to move into some action, right? So if you do not have enough goodwill stored up to pay for the cost, they will likely say yes. If you do not have enough goodwill stored up to pay for that cost, they will likely say no. If you have an excess of goodwill, you are likely to say yes, and it may not even reduce the amount of goodwill if you have enough goodwill that you will accumulate for doing what they are wanting, you want them to help you with. For example, I might ask you to help me to fund my trip to Nairobi, but by the same token, when I go and do that trip, you may have more goodwill for me than when I started, and vice versa. Because it operates in the mind of another person, there's no way really to control that except through your action. Let me give you another example of kind of how the management of goodwill works in real life. For example, if you're driving down the highway onto an on-ramp and you see someone with a cardboard sign and it's some guy and it says, "We'll work for food." I don't know that person, so whether or not I will be receptive to his request or not determines at that point on how much goodwill I have for human beings in general. And I may say yes or I may say no. If I'm busy and I don't want to stop to help him, the cost will be higher, so I'm less likely to say yes. If I have a handful of loose change in my car that I hate having in my car, it might be a benefit for me to do that, and therefore I might say yes. It all depends on how I feel at that particular time. If, for example, that sign now gets changed to help desperate father with hungry kids, anything will help, then I may have more goodwill because if he's in the group of fathers, which I feel good about, if he's somebody who will be helping kids, so indirectly, he might be creating goodwill. If I care about children, then I may feel a swelling of goodwill, and therefore I might empty my wallet to this person. But if I see the same thing and I make the determination that this guy is a liar, then the amount of goodwill I have for him will go down. If I make the determination he's probably using children to pull on my heartstrings, the amount of goodwill I will have for him will go down. If I say people who I see with cardboard signs on the side of the road are probably crystal meth addicts trying to score their next hit, and I have a problem with that, then the amount of goodwill I have for him will go down. Whenever we're dealing with a person who's essentially a total stranger who's unknown to you, then what they are asking for you and how much goodwill that you have for them will be determinant as to whether you'll help them. If they promise to help the less fortunate, it might go up. If you think of them as a generous person, it might go up. If you see that it helps other people, it might go up. If, for example, if you think that you are a liar, it'll go down. If you think you're using someone else, it'll go down. If you're stealing somebody else's goodwill, it'll go down. To give an example of how that works conversationally is, there are a lot of situations where we talk about people who have done something unseemly to a woman of some type or another. And people will use the phrase in there, imagine if that was your daughter or your wife or your sister or your mother. How would you feel then? What they're trying to do is to appropriate the goodwill that you have for those people who presumably you care about and apply that to the person who is the victim in this situation. And whether you feel that is right or wrong will depend on how you feel about the issue that is being discussed at the time, and whether you feel that the person is just trying to open our eyes and make us see the difference, or whether you feel like that person is trying to manipulate us. It's the same situation. The point of view that you look at it will determine whether you have more or less goodwill at the end of the day than you did when you began. And that's why you can have the same person making the same plea. Some people will see it as a heroic champion of social justice. Other people will see it as a ne'er-do-well carpetbagger coming in to use our feelings, to steal our money, to make themselves rich, and then will flee without caring about anybody. Right? That's the same situation. People looking at the same set of facts and circumstances, because they interpret it differently. Some people will open their wallets, and some people will break out the pitchforks and torches and, tar and feather and all that kind of thing. So that's why some people react so negatively to somebody who says, I am trying to help, because they see them as taking advantage of the goodwill that group has, built up in order to advantage themselves. So that's the way that other people, and I guess to some degree some of you, use goodwill. The reason that I find that it is important or it is useful to look at things in terms of goodwill is because it gives you a way to kind of try and figure out the motivations of other people, the motivations of ourselves, the way that other people are interacting, why some people are popular, why some people are hated, why the same people are popular or hated. So I would say to you, as an individual, you want to manage your goodwill instead of just having it haphazardly go. Even if you have no reason to do something nice for somebody, maybe you're storing up goodwill. If it's not just the milk of human kindness, maybe you store up goodwill. And maybe at some point when you need something, someone will help you. The only way to be a good person is to be a good person, right? You store up goodwill. Other people see that. They respect you. And when you're in need to help yourself or to help somebody else, you'll have a store of goodwill with which to draw upon. Anyway, so that's kind of my thoughts on how we manage this thing called goodwill. And I hope that it's been to some degree interesting to see how I look at this kind of interpersonal relationship kind of thing through the lens, or I don't want to use lens particularly because that's not what I mean, through this theory of goodwill. And maybe you can try it out, stretch it over like things in your life and see whether or not it does a good job of capturing those interactions, and see if it does a good job of being able to predict how people are going to react, or maybe give some insight as to why people react the way they do. Or maybe it'll just be fun. Anyway, that's all I have for you in terms of managing goodwill. I hope it's been helpful to you. As always, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll think of something interesting to talk about next time. As always, thanks and have a great day.